How did you first learn that Dr. King had been shot?
I would guess on the radio approximately 20 minutes later. I was heading towards New Orleans.
What did you hear?
I think there was a report that he'd been shot, and I didn't pay too much attention to that. And I'd say 15 or 20 minutes later, there was a report that they were looking for a white Mustang, which did...
And what did you decide to do at the time?
Well, at the time, before I heard about the Mustang, I was going to New Orleans where I had some contacts and possibly make a phone call. And after I heard about the looking for the Mustang, I had to make certain assumptions that they were looking for me. And instead of going to New Orleans, I went to Atlanta, Georgia.
Did you pull the trigger on the rifle that killed Dr. King?
No, I didn't, no.
That from James Earl Ray. Stay with us. We're about to be joined by a former FBI agent who'll be telling us about an awful creation of J. Edgar Hoover's. It was called the Destroy King Squad. That, then more on the murder of Dr. King after this. Dick Gregory, Mark Lane, and I have been joined by a retired special agent for the FBI. His name is Arthur Murtaugh. He joined the Bureau in 1951 and served as a special agent until his retirement in 1971. He now practices law and is an associate professor of criminal justice at Clarkson College in upstate New York. Arthur, welcome on the program. What exactly was your assignment at the FBI?
I was a special agent in the FBI for 20 years in different parts of the country. I spent the last 11 years in Atlanta.
All right. Did you witness or participate in any efforts by the FBI to discredit Dr. King?
I did not participate in them, but I was aware about 1962 that a very carefully orchestrated vendetta had been organized to discredit Dr. King. The history of this goes back to the activities in Albany, Georgia, where Dr. King made some criticism of the Bureau, and from that time on there was more time spent in connection with discrediting Dr. King, at least in the Atlanta office, than there was on all the rest of the security work put together.
Was there a Destroy King squad?
Well, the squad, I remarked just before coming on that it probably would be better not to use the term Destroy King Squad. It wasn't called that. Its purpose certainly was to destroy King. It was called, like any other squad, it was a security squad of the Atlanta office. And everything they did, or most of what they did, was designed to discredit Dr. King.
Like what?
Well, like keeping a wiretap on him for many years, and taking the information off the wiretap, anything that was unfavorable, and attempting to peddle it to newspapers throughout the country and get it published. This was a procedure that went on day after day, and it was open. Everybody in the office, I think, knew it. I knew it, and I'm sure most other people knew it.
How do you feel about that now?
Well, I feel the same as I did then. I think it was a miscarriage of justice, and it should have been stopped.
Where were you when Dr. King was shot?
I was in the office in Atlanta, just getting ready to sign out to go home.
What was the response of some of your colleagues?
As we were walking out about 10 minutes to 7 or 5 minutes to 7, we heard on the radio that played in the office the news of Dr. King's death, and of the news that he had been shot. And at that, this fellow who was a squad member and an agent literally jumped up and down with glee, and he well, I wouldn't want to demonstrate it, but he actually physically jumped off the ground and said, "I'm glad the son of a bitch, I'm glad they got him, I hope the son of a bitch is dead." And a few minutes later, while we were signing out, the news came over that Dr. King had been killed, and he went through the same antics of, "I'm glad he's dead," and so on. Now, I walked with him from down to where we parked our cars, and I talked with him, and I said, "I don't understand your attitude." And he went on to explain to me that he thought Dr. King was a threat to the security of the United States, and that he was happy that he was dead, period.
Do you think that that was a prevalent mood within the Bureau?
I think that the Bureau, the agents that I knew that worked in, particularly in the security area, due to the system of selection of agent personnel, there had been a group of agents selected that were, for the most part, extremely rightist in their thinking. Many of them were radicals on the right, and I'm as opposed to radicals on the left as I am to radicals on the right. But many of these people were radicals on the right, and they were racist-oriented, and they fed the system that Hoover wanted in the effort to destroy King, yes.
Is it possible, in your mind, that as Mark and Dick suggest in their book, the FBI or members of the Bureau, past members, deceased or living, could or can be considered suspects in the assassination of Dr. King?
Of course. No question about it whatsoever. Now, I wouldn't want to thrust suspicion on all FBI agents by any manner or means. But I knew agents that I would not trust in a circumstance involving the security of a person like Dr. King. I knew agents who hated and said so openly. Okay. I recall an incident where an agent came in on the investigation where the civil rights workers were buried in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and a fellow came in, and I was sitting waiting to get into the inspector's office to get my instructions, and I was sitting talking to this fellow, and I said, what do you think about the death of these civil rights workers? And he was an agent, a man 40 years old. He said, I told the inspector a few minutes ago, when I heard about the killing of those 3 civil rights workers, if they are killed, and it isn't some kind of a ruse, I told him a thrill of joy went up my spine. Now, there were that kind of people in the FBI. Not very many, you see, but enough to, in my judgment, make it very plausible that somebody in the FBI could have leaked information and could have assisted in an assassination plot against Dr. King. I don't mean to say that I know that they did. I'm just saying that it should be investigated.
Yeah, I agree with you. Stay with us. Let's take a commercial break. We'll be right back after this. We're back. My guests are Mark Lane, Dick Gregory, and Arthur Murtaugh, a retired FBI agent. And Dick and Mark, I want you to comment and respond to what you've heard Arthur just say.
You know, I said earlier that I think America is mature enough to deal with the truth. And I just say that, you know, if my father was an FBI agent and all the publicity coming out on the FBI, I would feel much better tonight after knowing that there's some Arthur Murtaughs around with the FBI. And I think that it is this type of individual that will overshadow all the wrongs of this nation and various organizations if, like he said, happened, if they can be cleaned out at the top. And I love you, and I thank God we have people like you.
Mark?
Well, hearing Mr. Murtaugh again is just a chilling experience to think of what was taking place. When you compare the speech that Dr. King made with what people in the FBI were thinking about him, I don't know how anyone in Congress could hear Arthur Murtaugh and not say this must be investigated thoroughly. And we are all of us are really grateful.
I learned in 1958 when a man who at that time was, or right after that time, became an assistant director, he said to me in connection with the matter, he said, Art, you want to get this information to Mr. Hoover. And he said, I know you're right, and I know that what you're saying is of good principle and so forth, and I admire a man of good principle. But he said, you've got to make up your mind that we don't have any place for people of principle in the FBI. And you're either going to have to give up your principles or get out of the FBI. And I told him at that time, I said, no way am I going to get out of the FBI. I'm going to stay in, and I'm going to find out what's wrong with the FBI, and at the opportune moment, I'm going to do something about it.
Arthur, I want to quote again from the Department of Justice Task Force official report. Quote from page 63. Based on our review of the files, the task force is satisfied that the FBI did a credible and thorough job in attempting to identify any possible conspiracy or persons who could have been involved in the murder. Do you think it's possible that the same people, the same personalities who were involved in the FBI's efforts to discredit King could have conducted a thorough and credible investigation of his assassination?
I certainly do not think that they could.
For instance, the gentleman that you said was in the Atlanta office when you were, who jumped for joy at the news of Dr. King's death, was he involved in the subsequent investigation?
Yes, he had I think there weren't very many agents involved in the actual investigation. Probably, a lot of them had leads. Probably 8 or 9 actually shaped up the investigation in Atlanta, and he would have been one of those 8 or 9.
Incredible. I hope Congress is listening. Our next guest will be Congressman Walter Fauntroy. He's the U.S. representative from Washington, D.C. He was formerly a close associate of Dr. King, and he was also one of the organizers of the historic March on Washington in 1963. Congressman Fauntroy co-sponsored the congressional resolution that called for the establishment of a House Assassination Committee, and he's now chairman of the Martin Luther King Jr. Assassination Subcommittee. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on the program. Why don't we start with your bringing us up to date. What is the status of the congressional inquiry right now into the assassination of Dr. King?
We are pursuing 2 lines of inquiry. First, we are reviewing all available data on investigations conducted by state, local, and federal authorities on the matter. And then secondly, we're pursuing previously unpursued leads, and some new leads that have come to us since we've begun the investigation.
What do you think about the evidence contained in the Gregory Lane book?
Well, quite frankly, it was astounding evidence, and it was that evidence which prompted me to move in the House to sort of reopen the whole question. In March of 1976, the whole question of an investigation had sort of failed in the Rules Committee, but once I had gained access to this information and moved around the Hill talking to leadership, we decided to open the question again, and that resulted in the committee being established.
Tell me frankly what the sentiment is in Congress. Do you think a meaningful search for the truth is possible?
I think a meaningful search for the truth is possible, and that, in fact, we're going to find out the truth. I believe that. I have been somewhat puzzled by the attitude I found among some people on the Hill and in the country at large that seem to say, leave it buried, we don't want to know. I think we're going to know. Dr. King used to say, truth crushed to earth will rise again. I think it's going to rise, and this committee will preside over the resurrection of it.
I certainly hope so. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on. Now, even if we take as an established fact that James Earl Ray was a raging bigot whose blind hatred of the civil rights movement knew no rational bounds, and even if we conclude that Ray had a wild yearning for recognition, as some of the official historians say, and even if we find that Ray thought he could earn instant money from some grateful admirer if he could pull off the murder of Dr. King, even if we establish all those things as undeniable fact, then still there are questions crying out for truthful answers. Who, for instance, provided James Earl Ray with the money he used to travel and purchase cars and cameras and even dancing lessons during his year of freedom following his escape from Missouri Penitentiary and including his murder of Dr. King, his alleged murder? Why was Detective Ed Reddit removed from duty 2 hours before Dr. King was assassinated? And finally, why was the Justice Department investigation permitted to rely so heavily on the findings of the FBI, investigators who, if anything, shared James Earl Ray's awful animosity toward Dr. King and the cause Dr. King did so much to advance, the cause of justice and civil rights? Hopefully, the Congressional Select Subcommittee will now put politics aside and continue its work with a meaningful search for the truth. A great American was brutally murdered, cut down in the prime of his life and in the midst of his mission. And the American people, all of us, deserve to know who all was responsible. We'll be right back after this.